Hi, you've reached Spark, where we look at life through the lens of what we are reading and writing. I'm your host, Betsy Morrow, and I'm excited to welcome you to the latest interview in our series focusing on San Diego writers. I'll be talking with Ari Hornarvar about the parallels between her life as an Iranian refugee to the United States and the story that unfolds in her debut novel, A Girl Called Rumi. A bit about Ari. She is an award winning writer, speaker, and artist dedicated to building bridges between the arts, social justice, and well being. Her words have appeared in Parents Magazine, Teen Vogue, The Guardian, Washington Post, Newsweek, New York Times, and elsewhere. Her novel, A Girl Called Rumi, was published in 2021. It has earned a Bookfest Award, a Nautilus Award, a Locus Award, and a Forward Indies Award. She has also earned a spot on the Kirkus Review's Best Books of 2022. She is the author and illustrator of Rumi's Gift, featuring an oracle deck and accompanying book of Ari's original translations, meditations, stories, and the artistic collaboration with the renowned illustrator Carmen Costello. She is also the Iranian musical ambassador of peace, dancing with refugees and conducting Resilience Through Joy workshops for refugees and volunteers on either side of the US-Mexico border and Europe. She speaks internationally and collaborates with artists of different cultures and is the founder of Drop Poems, Not Bombs and Dance for Freedom, both aimed at supporting the people of Iran, including Iranian protesters. She has lived in San Diego since 2008 with her family. Our interview starts with a question about the inspiration for this novel about Kimia, a young Iranian girl who first flees into her imagination to escape the war and conflicts in her home, and later flees to the United States. Kimia can only resolve the unanswered questions she carries from her childhood by risking her hard-won peace and safety and returning to Iran. Without further ado, here's our interview. So it took you quite a long time to get from beginning of this book, which I understand began as a screenplay, to the book that it became. And as you know, I'm very curious about this journey and how it corresponded with your own journey as a person who came here from Iran and made a life for herself here in the United States. So tell me anything that you can tell me about how this story came to be and how it works with your own.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you for linking the two together because I hadn't thought about it until now that, it took 14 years from the moment I was born to when I came to the US and migrated here. And then all this stuff transpired. And then many years later, I met my husband who asked me if I wanted to write a screenplay together. And at that moment, I had no desire or hadn't even thought about writing ever. So I was like, sure, it was a sweet thing, part of our courting process. And so we just kind of developed this story together. And one of the things that we incorporated into it was the Seven Valleys of Love, which is a mythical journey of these birds. And it's an allegory for people finding themselves, or if you want to call it enlightenment, where you go have an inward journey, which is an old myth. And it was a retelling by Attar, who was one of Rumi's teachers. He was a mystic. And so I really wanted to incorporate that into our story, into our screenplay. And we did that, and we wrote a little thing. We submitted to a few screenplay contests and got to, semifinals or quarterfinals and finals. And then we forgot all about it and moved and everything. had a life, and then
The courtship ended and the life began.
yeah. So then in 2017, there were a lot of people. It was right around the Muslim ban by our former president, and a lot of editors and agents were looking for writers from the Middle East, and it was just about the time that I was starting to write a few op-eds, because I also felt similarities with what happened in Iran and what was happening in the US at the time, which really frightened me. And so I started writing op-eds, and then started writing this book too.
Now, did the book come from the op-eds, or the inspiration for turning the screenplay into a novel come from that experience, or did somebody say, would you please write this book?
A lot of people said, write this book, and I was like, okay, I will. So they didn't say write this book, they said write a book.
Right.
And I'm not, and a lot of people were interested in because my essays are generally memoir pieces. They were interested in memoirs, and I am not a memoir reader, so I definitely don't want to write memoir. So that's what I was like, I'll just write a novel and incorporate some of what happened to me into the novel too.
I'm sure people ask you all the time, and I know in some of the interviews I happen to see, how much of your own experience pops up in the novel. Do you want to give us some highlights now?
Yeah, there are a lot of scenes that come from my personal from my own experiences, from my memories, like the one where the kids are it's a red siren. We had color-coded sirens who went for when the Iraqi planes or missiles were about to shoot at us. And if it was a situation red, which was the red siren, that means that the threat was imminent and you had to go into a shelter or something. So we all the kids, we were at school when this happened, and everyone was crying and they're asking for their mothers, and I just grabbed the blowhorn from my principal and started doing these impressions of our favorite characters that we used to watch, and the series in Iran, and then everyone was like quiet, and parents came in, and later they told my mom, we came to pick up our kids, and they were laughing. They didn't want to go home with us. What was going on?
So you were imitating TV characters that
Yes.
you guys all used to watch as kids?
Yes.
And how old were you then? How old were you during this period? Do you remember?
I'm thinking like around 11 or so.
Yeah,
11.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that part was real. The part about when our house got raided by the morality police because our neighbor was throwing a birthday party, that was very real and very traumatic. The part I don't think I mentioned specifically. I may have hinted at it, that our neighbor's daughter, who was a teenager, she was executed. So that was also quite real, and several other scenes as well.
And she was executed, I think I've read that for doing something that many people had done, including yourself, writing on a wall, or what did she do go a little further with her level of protest?
Part of the whole terror of living under theocracy is that whatever you do that's against the government, whenever you express your dissent, you're also expressing your dissent against God, and that's punishable by death. So it could be anything. We have no idea why they executed her. In fact, my father asked her father at one point, it's like, why did they kill her? And he just shook his head, the father, and said, I don't know. They never told us. They just said, come get her body.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
devastating for your parents as well. And I understand that it was your parents that, included particularly your mother, who created a situation where you could come as a young girl out of
Yes.
Iran and into the United States through India, through an Indian visa.
Yes. You've
And
done your homework, huh?
oh, well, I love the story because Roya in the book is a poet, and poetry is such a strong oh force throughout the novel. And as you explain in the novel and elsewhere, the culture of Iran, that I was blown away by. She wrote a poem, and the person in charge of Indian visas was apparently moved by this, and hence you came to live in Houston. So it's kind of something that I think would be interesting for people to hear a little bit about, that that feeling of coming here as a young girl, because didn't your parents have to return?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, I was just yesterday doing an interview, and it was about that loss, that sense of loss that you feel
Mm-hmm.
as when it's about the book was about grief, but my part was about how when you lose your home, you lose your country, you lose your culture. And I described it as if, so first of all, I was delirious with all the newfound freedoms. Now I could dance, I could just go in a bikini and shop, and no one was gonna bat an eye. I could sing from the top of my lungs. I could say death to, the president. Nothing would happen to me. And so that was just so I was like punch drunk with that. But at the same time, I was completely traumatized because of what I had experienced, seen, heard, and I was homesick because nothing reminded me of home. So I would just kind of I'd hint at this in the book, where I would just see someone's hunched shoulders, and I would think of I would look for my uncle. I would wish that man to be my uncle. Or I would hear someone's laughter, and I would wish that person to be my sister. So it was like a fractured childhood. It was a broken childhood, and I was carrying the rubble of my shattered childhood within me. And so it was such a trying to put pieces of the puzzle together somehow, so I would make a home for myself within myself. I was so lost and homesick that I needed to do that.
Mm-hmm. And what did that look like? And did it get better when your parents were able to rejoin you?
So it took 21 years before my whole family was able
That
to.
long. That
Yeah,
long.
it was brutal. The next time I saw my parents was when I was 17. So 3 years I didn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time I was completely a different person. Teenage years are like dog years. So I was starting to, and so my parents were so baffled by the transformation,
Oh, I
and
imagine. It's
yeah, and we couldn't really relate to each other. So it was just like we're having all these disagreements, and yeah, it was wild.
think I told you in my notes to you that I was fascinated by Roya, the mother of Kimia and Aram. And am I saying her name correctly? Kimia?
Kimia and Arman. Uh-huh.
Arman, excuse me, not Aram, Arman.
Mhm.
And she fascinated me because she's a powerful figure in the book,
Mhm.
and was both a source of great creativity and life and nurturing, especially the opening pages. I mean, even if her children feel separate from her, she is feeding them and they are eating. They are accepting what she offers, and she offers it because it's important to her to do so, and she feels it's important to them.
Mhm.
At the same time, the descriptions of her behavior when she is going through some difficult times back in Iran before Kimia and Arman are able to leave Iran when they're children are quite starkly, they're difficult. And one of my questions was, is Roya somebody that is a product of her time and culture in terms of how she mothered? Are some of these behaviors Roya's alone?
Mhm.
And then we have a couple of Mitch. I think I'm very curious to see how you see it now that you've written the book and you look back on it, how much of Roya's mothering was shaped by her own fears and desires and limitations or hurts, and how it all her presence in their children's lives affected their ability and their journeys
Mhm.
later after they moved. So we can tackle this in pieces. First, tell me about Roya and how she came to be.
That's such a thoughtful question, and I don't think I've ever analyzed her as such. So I'll attempt to do so.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say that is that was she is a very passionate individual. She knows she does not like to hold her tongue. She loves expressing herself, and poetry is one of those ways that she expresses herself. One thing that we noticed, and we can notice in times of great distress, is that whatever personality, whatever flaw, whatever weakness that you have, that ends up being bring you to the brink or even cross over. So like during the pandemic, we saw um, just the number of people, domestic abuse, that the went just completely increased, or
Mm-hmm.
all other stress, all other problems, whether it was physical or psychological, emotional, spiritual, all of those start surfacing in times of great difficulty. And so her way was that she had an anger issue to begin with. She was traumatized as a child herself, and she had so much rage within her. So in a good, if everything had remained stable in Iran, she probably would have been not so volatile with her temper, where she would lash out and she would abuse her kids. But and then her husband was gone too, and he was also a mitigator. He was a neutralizer of that that damaging rage, and he wasn't there either. So those two elements really pushed her to a place where that's how she just couldn't cope. This was what she was doing. Now she was a abusive mother. And then Kimia, the way that she transformed by all of this was that she went into the world of imagination so much. She sought escape. And Arman, on the other hand, went and became a militant because of the chaos that he was experiencing at home. He had to figure out a way to contain and have a structure within which he could feel safe and be himself.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was struck by, I think I mentioned that to you in my email to you, is how you were able to capture for each character. For example, you just described Armand's underlying need, to join the young men who were in the not the Revolutionary Guard, but the morality police. They were younger versions of it,
Right.
and he sought out this structure, as indeed his young mentor, the one who turns out to be kind of the villain in the end of the book, but also not quite all the way a villain. You have great empathy for each of these characters. We don't just see a young man go in, we see why.
Arman, on the other hand, went and became a militant because of the chaos that he was experiencing at home. He had to figure out a way to contain and have a structure within which he could feel safe and be himself.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was struck by, I think I mentioned that to you in my email to you, is how you were able to capture for each character. For example, you just described Armand's underlying need, to join the young men who were in the not the Revolutionary Guard, but the morality police. They were younger versions of it,
Right.
and he sought out this structure, as indeed his young mentor, the one who turns out to be kind of the villain in the end of the book, but also not quite all the way a villain. You have great empathy for each of these characters. We don't just see a young man go in, we see why. What you have just described is very apparent in the book. Armand is looking for some structure, some place to be a man, some place to be among others and to feel safe. Yet we understand the entire time that he is not completely convinced. He is not completely consumed by the ideology. He simply wants to find that path that will get him through. Whereas Kimia is much more rebellious just by nature. And there were times when I wanted to just grab her by the neck and say, don't do this. You're going to get into trouble. You are going to put all the people that are around you in trouble, Yet I loved her. I loved the spirit of her and loved how you portrayed her, her young friend, and Reza, his name was, yeah. And all the little, nobody was idealized. Nobody was sort of presented as a perfect person. They were all people like that even people outside of us, outside of Iran, could look and say, oh, I could see this. I could see myself going through something like this. I could see my kids struggling in the same way, or if I were a child. And number one, kudos to you. But number two, tell me about how you did that. I mean,
the characters speak to you, they whisper in your ears, and they tell you how they want to be portrayed. I was surprised how adamant they were. Like, I wanted to go under direction. Like, for example, Mortez, I was like, no, you don't understand. Look at me. Here's what's going on for me. Here's what I was feeling and doing when this happened.
And may I interrupt just to explain that Mortaz is the leader of the young men that Armand joins, and he is the one that is turned into somebody who is, on the surface of it, a very bad man when we first meet, when we encounter him as an adult. And so, what you're saying is he, like all the others, spoke to you and said, please tell my whole story, not just that one piece. That's interesting to me.
Don't make me a caricature villain. That's not that's not acceptable. You have to present the texture and the visceralness of what happened to me.
Well, it was and I think, are there writers of stories like yours, either Iranian stories from Iran, stories from other people who have made such a huge change in their lives, either as refugees or as immigrants, that you have read, that you admire, that you would want to share with people or ask people to seek out?
Yeah, there's one Iranian writer and filmmaker, and I really enjoyed her book, and it's called To Keep the Sun Alive, and it's by Rabia Ghaffari. And there is this woman who I was in a conference with. We were both arrived as unaccompanied minors in the US. She's from Guatemala, and her name is Emily Francis, and she wrote a book called If You Only Knew. And her book is about the it's a series of letters she has written to her ESL students. She's an ESL teacher now, about her own journey in the US and how and then the kids' journey. So you really get a sense of tremendous empathy for what migrants and refugees are going through.
And do you have any advice for writers that you had learned the hard way? Are there like three things that you would offer somebody who's trying to write their own novel right now, or perhaps is working on their second one, mistakes that you would avoid the second time? Things you would do differently. Not.
I, yeah, so I teach this little course called uh, writing and you know in I don't even remember what it's called anymore, but it's writing through joy, like coming, like developing a writing practice through joy. That's what it is. And it's basically this idea that when we writing is supposed to be really pleasurable for the most part, at least when you're getting the story down on the paper. And if your muse is gone and you're frustrated, is because there's no joy anymore. And so the joy has dried out. So one of the things that to do is to bring that joy back through the five senses, and the five senses are so important in writing anyways, but the more we practice savoring pleasant moments through the five senses, it can increase our capacity for challenges. It can make our writer's block kind of just dissolve, and it's really good for problem solving. You can, and one of the five senses and imagination, and tapping into that world of imagination. So I would say, just if writing is hard, take a break and go do something that you enjoy, and come back and and enjoy writing too. Now, there are deadlines and things that you be serious about. There's copying that you have to make sure things are not sloppy and willy-nilly. That's a whole different thing. And that, when you have a deadline, when you know what you need to do, then yes, go ahead and enjoy yourself, but take out a chunk of time when there's no distraction. Turn off all your phones, your Wi-Fi, all the devices, and just focus on that for a good chunk of time, and then go do some exercise or run and just get your blood flowing before and after the writing, so you're not all cramped up and your body is not in a state of havoc.